There are some days when just one story dominates our coverage. One story fills this entire hour, like the day the redacted Mueller report is released. And we will have many more of those days, like this year with the investigations of the president. I'm sure we're going to have a lot of days like that. We might even have a couple of days like that next week when Attorney General William Barr testifies to the Senate Judiciary Committee on Wednesday and, more importantly, the House Judiciary Committee on Thursday. And I say more importantly because the House Judiciary Committee is controlled by Democrats who are actively seeking the full unredacted Mueller report and its supporting documents, while the Senate Judiciary Committee is controlled by Republicans with Chairman Lindsey Graham doing everything he possibly can to help William Barr contain the release of Robert Mueller's actual work. But every day, including every day when we become swamped in the coverage of one big story in Washington, remember that that day is also a presidential campaign day. We're in the middle of a presidential campaign. Most of the coverage of the presidential campaign is simply coverage of one half of the presidential campaign, the Democrats who are running for president. The other half of the presidential campaign is the Republican president running for re-election. So let's look at today. Let's look at today's developments in the Trump re-election campaign. And remember that for an incumbent president, everything that happens in the president's administration that day is a possible factor in the president's re-election campaign. So here's how Donald Trump's re-election campaign went today. Voters discovered today, through reporting by the Washington Post, that Donald Trump might have caved to North Korean demands and paid $2 million in ransom to get Kim Jong-un to release to allow for the release of Otto Warmbier from North Korean custody. North Korea participated in a cover-up of this ransom by calling it a hospital bill for Otto Warmbier, who was comatose by the time he left North Korea. There are no hospital bills in North Korea, none. A $2 million hospital bill in a country that doesn't have hospital bills? North Korea is the most totalitarian communist regime in the history of the world. The government owns everything. The government runs everything. The government controls everything. No North Korean hospital has the capacity to deliver $2 million worth of health care to anyone. North Korea, at the direction of Kim Jong-un, tortured Otto Warmbier. North Korea, at the direction of Kim Jong-un, murdered Otto Warmbier and sent him home after getting a promise of $2 million from Donald Trump, sent him home when he was dying. Sent him home when no amount of the best health care in the world could save Otto Warmbier. You won't be hearing about that on the presidential campaign trail from Donald Trump, but you will be hearing about it from his Republican challenger, Bill Weld, and you will be hearing about it from the Democratic candidates. And if Donald Trump is the Republican nominee, and if he agrees to debate the Democratic nominee, you are going to hear about Otto Warmbier and the $2 million ransom that Donald Trump agreed to pay. You're going to hear about that in a presidential debate. If Donald Trump agrees to participate in presidential debates, which I strongly doubt that he will, here is where Donald Trump's answer to every question about North Korea and Kim Jong-un stands tonight.
And then we fell in love, okay? No, really. He wrote me beautiful letters, and they're great letters. We fell in love.
You're going to see that in campaign ads against Donald Trump. We fell in love. He fell in love with a murderous dictator. He fell in love with the man who ordered the torture and murder of Otto Warmbier. He fell in love with him. You're going to see a lot of that video in the presidential campaign. And on this day, in the Trump re-election campaign, a giant hole broke open in the Fox wall of defense for the president. Former Judge Andrew Napolitano, whose commentary is generally favorable to the president and Republicans, but not slavishly so, took a giant leap into the unknown for the future of his career at Fox by saying today, in no uncertain terms, that President Trump is guilty of multiple obstructions of justice.
So when the president asked his former advisor and my former colleague at Fox, KT McFarland, to write an untruthful letter to the file knowing the government would subpoena it, that's obstruction of justice. When the president asked Corey Lewandowski, his former campaign manager, to get Mueller fired, that's obstruction of justice. When the president asked his then White House counsel to get Mueller fired and then lie about it, that's obstruction of justice. When he asked Don McGahn to go back to the special counsel and change his testimony, that's obstruction of justice. When he dangled a pardon in front of Michael Cohen in order to keep Cohen from testifying against him, that's obstruction of justice. Ordering them to break federal law to save him from the consequences of his own behavior, that is immoral, that is criminal, that is defenseless, and that is condemnable.
When he gets fired from Fox News, maybe Chairman Jerry Nadler could hire him as one of the counsels to the House Judiciary Committee. Andrew Napolitano, man you just saw, is someone who President Trump consulted on who he should select for the United States Supreme Court. That's who turned on Donald Trump today. Judge Napolitano said he's very disappointed in Donald Trump because of what he has read in the Mueller report. He's a personal friend of Donald Trump's. Losing Andrew Napolitano today was a very, very bad day in and of itself for the Trump campaign. He is the Fox network's highest legal authority. And on the day that Judge Napolitano said that Donald Trump was guilty of obstruction of justice, the highest-ranking Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, Vice Chairman Mark Warner, tried to alert the nation and alert voters in an article in USA Today that President Trump is, quote, practically inviting foreign adversaries to interfere in 2020. We now know that the Russians helped Donald Trump win the Electoral College last time. Donald Trump knows that. Donald Trump knows just how close he came to losing the Electoral College. Donald Trump knows he cannot afford to lose any of those voters who the Russians helped persuade to vote for Donald Trump last time. The Trump campaign needs them. And that's one of the reasons we have reports today that the last Secretary of Homeland Security, Kirstjen Nielsen, was advised not to tell the president about her worries that the Russians were planning to attack our election again in 2020 and are already at it. This would be like American intelligence discovering that the Soviets had nuclear missiles in Cuba aimed at the United States, and no one was allowed to tell President Kennedy in 1962 when that actually happened. Imagine a Trump presidency facing what President Kennedy faced, and no one could tell President Trump. In the most dangerous confrontation of the Cold War, President Kennedy used his intelligence, his experience, his judgment, and his trusted advisors to defuse a possible nuclear war with Russia. The Trump re-election campaign is now trying to re-elect a president who the Mueller report shows gives illegal orders that are ignored by his staff and who we now know cannot be told anything about what the Russians are planning in their next attack on our next election. And on this day in the Trump re-election campaign, the president got a new opponent. Former Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden. In Joe Biden's video announcement of his campaign, he didn't focus on the outrage of the week. He didn't even mention the Mueller report. He focused on the outrage that he says started him thinking about trying to take the White House back from Donald Trump. Joe Biden reached back 2 years across hundreds of Trump outrages and reminded the country of the one we must never forget. The time Donald Trump said that there were some good people chanting, "Jews will not replace us."
And that's when we heard the words of the President of the United States that stunned the world and shocked the conscience of this nation. He said there were, quote, some very fine people on both sides. Very fine people on both sides? With those words, the President of the United States assigned a moral equivalence between those spreading hate and those with the courage to stand against it. And in that moment, I knew the threat to this nation was unlike any I had ever seen in my lifetime.
Leading off our discussion tonight, former Democratic Senator from North Dakota, Heidi Heitkamp. She's now a fellow at Harvard's Institute of Politics, and today she launched a new initiative called the One Country Project, aimed at Democrats winning back rural voters. Also joining us, Steve Hildebrand, Democratic political strategist and former Deputy National Campaign Manager of President Obama's 2008 presidential campaign. And Jason Johnson is with us. He's the politics editor at TheRoot.com and a professor of politics and media at Morgan State University. He's also an MSNBC contributor, an all-star political lineup here for the presidential campaign analysis. Senator Heitkamp, I want to get your reaction to Joe Biden's entry into the campaign today and what it might mean for Donald Trump.
I think Joe Biden answered the question that every politician gets asked. Why are you in this race? And I think he did a marvelous job in leading with a values, character-based argument for why we need a change. You could only listen to your earlier comments and know that we are in a state where we need to have a change, and we need to broaden the dialogue and offer a greater range of options for fixing the problems in this country. And I think that's what Joe Biden is going to bring to this Democratic primary season. So I think it's what I have been anticipating and have said on your show. I expect Joe would get in, and here he is, and I think he's going to add to the flavor and to the dynamic nature of this primary season.
He certainly didn't have any surprise going for him this morning when he jumped in. Everyone knew it was coming. Steve Hildebrand, I want to go to the Trump campaign. There is a Trump campaign, a Trump re-election campaign that is, I think, ignored in the way that we cover the news. You're a veteran of a successful presidential campaign. I want you to imagine yourself in a president's re-election campaign, and you're watching the incoming every day at the White House, because for any president, there's always incoming at the White House. There's always something that can affect your presidential re-election campaign as president. But look at what the Trump White House is both creating by way of its own problems with Congress on subpoenas and other things, and what's happening to it that comes to it from the outside. You have a former cabinet member now recently left the cabinet, Homeland Security Secretary. It becomes revealed that she's not allowed, was never allowed, to mention Russia to the president. It just seems like almost every hour there's something happening that is another big problem for the Trump re-election campaign.
You know, every day they seem to wake up and create their own worst nightmare. They've got a political shield. They've got a 30 to 35% base that never wavers in support for him. That being said, I can't imagine how you can handle the political gunfire that comes at you every single day by your own creation. And that's what they do, Lawrence. It's unfathomable in politics. I don't understand it, to be honest with you.
Steve, let me just stay with you on this for a second, because what I've seen with every other president, as soon as they're elected and literally on election night in their victory speeches, one of the very first things they do is they reach out to voters who did not vote for them. And they do that in their victory speeches. They then do that in their inauguration addresses, their inaugural addresses. They do it in their State of the Union addresses. I haven't seen Donald Trump once, not once, since election night. I have not seen him once try to speak publicly to a voter who did not already vote for him. How do you form a re-election campaign with a candidate who has never once attempted to pick up a new voter?
You know, he seems to only understand that you work to tear people apart, that you work to divide the country, that there's winners and losers. You know, honestly, he seems to be framing himself with the losers and that small coalition. And I don't see how, unless the Democrats really screw this up, how he can get reelected, because, as you said, he has never reached across the aisle. And that's one of Joe Biden's strengths, is he's going to have capacity to go after voters who felt a little bit disenfranchised in 2008 or 2006, I'm sorry, and to bring them back into our fold where they've been for a long time, but they just weren't courted properly while Trump was really, really going after them.
Jason Johnson, when you look at today as a day in the Trump re-election campaign, it's another disastrous campaign day.
Oh, yeah, yeah. But here's the thing, Lawrence. There have been tons of these for Donald Trump, and he is oblivious to how bad he ends up looking. I think that the idea of a Fox legal analyst basically saying, you guys can impeach this guy, is one of the worst things that could happen. Because, look, objectively speaking, we all know that. We've seen parts of the Mueller report. We've heard the legal analysis. But what it says is there are other people at Fox who believe this. I don't think this guy was just going out on a limb. That means that there are people within the Trump camp and coalition who actually believe that we now have a president of the United States who is legitimately impeachable. And that is the most dangerous indicator that he could have. Donald Trump he's already starting 3 million votes behind. He is not in a strong position going into 2020. And if that is a belief, and if the Democrats can manage this properly and actually do an impeachment hearing, he's much weaker than I think even he could have anticipated a couple months ago.
Senator Heitkamp, no one knows more Trump voters in this group. No one knows more Trump voters than you do. Your state voted for Donald Trump in a pretty strong way. Do you sense a loosening of the Trump grip? The next segment we're going to do is a Republican saying that the Mueller report was the breaking point for him. You just saw Judge Napolitano from Fox saying, yes, this is obstruction of justice. Is the Trump grip loosening, do you think?
I think that Trump sees two other weapons that he has: a good economy, and he'll say it's about the economy, and fear. And we know how well he plays that card. And so in rural America, the economy is not as good as it is in other parts of this country. So one of the major thrusts for this president in terms of seeking re-election and securing the unified base that we've been talking about is a good economy. That's not true in rural America, and that's something we're going to be talking about in the One Country Project. You know, we need to hold him accountable. He promised a better economy for our farmers, a better economy for rural America, and he's not delivering. And so I think he's concerned. That's why you see Xi coming to the White House. He's concerned about what the tariffs have done to rural America and to farmers, and he's got to address some of these systemic problems. But, you know, the bottom line is he would say, if he were on this show, look, I have the best economy in the history of this country, which we all know is not true, but that is going to be my shield against any of these other things that you all have been talking about. And you know, that can be a pretty persuasive argument to a lot of people. And I'm probably the minority here. I think Donald Trump could get reelected. And I think he could get reelected if we do not focus on economic challenges in the parts of the country that he is strong and where he is failing those parts of the country.
You are not alone in that opinion, because Jason Johnson is nodding here right beside me. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, well, I've always assumed that President Trump's going to get reelected.
Going to get reelected.
Yeah, most presidents get reelected in American history. The only thing that works against him, he's got weak fundamentals, right? He lost by 3 million votes. He's never been at 50% approval rating. And every single state that he won that made a difference in 2016 flipped blue in a hard way during the midterms. But at the end of the day, we see the weakness in some of the Democrats by Joe Biden's announcement today. Look, Joe Biden spent most of his announcement. You were Barack Obama's vice president for 8 years, and you spend your announcement talking about Trump. We need to get a reason to vote for you. Everybody knows why to vote against Donald Trump. And I'll be honest, if the Democrats can't figure out how to give you something to vote for, as opposed to giving you something to vote against, they won't win. I was disappointed in this announcement from Joe Biden. I expected him to be a lot more politically savvy than he was.
We're going to have to break it there. I wish we could go on with this discussion, but we've got a lot more to cover coming up in this hour. And obviously, the presidential campaign is not going away. We're all coming back to the subject. Senator Heitkamp, thank you very much for joining us. Steve Hildebrand, Jason Johnson, thank you all for starting us off tonight. Really appreciate it, Steve. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.